Hey everyone, it's Jody here. I have been working on my capstone project for my doctorate, and I thought that I just am so interested in it, and it's just sparked my curiosity and interest so much that I thought I'd share it with you. And so here I go. So it might be a longer video, but if you are interested in teenagers at all, and you have been witnessing this teenage mental health crisis that is going on, this will be a really interesting video, and I think it will reveal some things, and it will help you think about how to move forward, I hope. So let me share my screen here. All right, so I'll get it started to present. All right. So these are my slides that I just presented in my class. And in my class, I had to present and do a defense, an oral defense for my capstone project. So my capstone project this is my proposal to do the project. I didn't do the project yet. Once I do the project, I'll have an oral defense of the completion of the project. And now this is an oral defense of the proposal of the project. I have to get approved to do it. Or my teacher will correct me and tell me what, my professor will correct me and tell me what I have to do to make it the level of rigor that it needs to be for a doctorate level. Anyway, so welcome to Compass. Compass is the name of my program. It's a wise intervention to address the teen mental health crisis. So the why of the program is, this is my why. There is a huge problem. The mental health problems among adolescents are rising. And I think like you see this everywhere. Right? This is not a surprise to any of us. Actually, mental health problems among everybody is rising because of the modern world that we live in and the coronavirus. You'll see how that's correlated. But we know that our youth are in trouble and that we have to do something. And there's grave consequences of our youth in trouble. And a lot of people, if you have a young person who's trying to get help, you know that there is not enough providers out there. So we have this growing problem and less capability to help. So this is what I'm trying to address. So first we'll do an overview of the literature that tells us what the prevalence is, tells us the consequences of this problem, the mental health problem among teenagers. We'll go over the correlations of like why it's rising so much and possible causes. We're going to talk about the barriers and facilitators to treatment, to helping these young people. And we're going to talk about the available modalities in helping, the available therapeutic modalities. So stick with me. Here we go. So prevalence. So the ABES stands for the Adolescent Behavior and Experience Survey. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention do these surveys all the time, every year. And they survey this particular survey was from 9th to 12th graders. And they asked them who has been sad and hopeless in the last 12 months. And in 2009, 26% said yes. And in 2019, 37% said yes. And then in 2021, 44.2% said yes, that they've experienced sadness and hopelessness in the last year. It's rising and rising. You can see how it's rising so quickly. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration surveyed adolescents 12 to 17 and asked who has felt like they had or who has experienced a major depressive episode in the last year. 9% said yes in 2004 and 15.7% in 2019. Now look at the language is different. If these people on this survey, if these young people on this survey were asked if they were sad or hopeless, those numbers would be quite different, right? Because people think about a major depressive episode different than feeling sad and hopeless, though the suffering could be the same and equal. It's like we don't know how to describe these things. When you're describing mental health problems, everybody describes it different in their heads. And so I'll be talking about mental health problems, but mostly thinking about anxiety and depression, because of course, I have my book, Anxiety, I'm So Done With You. Because those are the major problems in mental health suffering that young people are doing and people of all age are doing, is anxiety and depression. And I use the terms anxiety and I use the terms depression as descriptors of someone's feelings. So I'm not talking about it when I say it as a diagnosis. I'm not labeling people and saying these are people who carry diagnoses, because that confuses people. People are like, well, I'm not sure if I'm bad enough to be diagnosed with it or not. Diagnoses are subjective, so I'm going to stay away from that and use it as a descriptor. So if you experience any feelings of anxiety, or if you experience any feelings of depression, we don't want you to feel bad. We want to help you feel better, and you deserve to feel better. And that doesn't mean like, oh, you'll always feel happy 100% of the time and that's how you should be. No. I'm saying if you're suffering, if your life isn't the way you want it to be, and if you're really struggling, some people are suffering so much more than they have to, right? Yes, we're human. So some days are bad days and some days are good days. But when you have a lot of bad days and that's taking over your whole life, that's not okay. We want to help you feel a lot better about your life. That's the message to people of all ages, especially young people. Okay. So this last statistic here is curtain is the, of course, I'm in a doctoral program, so I have some of these things. I have some of the citations in there. This is also the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this study, and this was the National Vital Statistics Report from the Centers for Disease and Prevention, evaluated people aged 10 to 24, and noticed that in 11 years, the suicide rate increased 57.4%. And in 2018, suicide became the second leading cause of death of people this age. This is 2018. This is before the pandemic. So we all know that things have gotten worse, haven't we? Okay, so consequences. So there's consequences of this. And I know I'm in the way here. Okay. There's consequences of this happening. And some of the consequences, now, when people feel out of control because they're feeling anxiety and depression, these make people feel out of control in their life. And so they try to seek control in their behaviors. So these first four here on the top are ways that people seek control over themselves. So suicidal behaviors, eating disorders, self-harm, and substance misuse. And the last three are people trying to get control over other people, right? So when we feel out of control, we try to grab control somewhere. And I talk about this a lot. I'm creating a podcast for teenagers that goes along with my book, and it really expands on every single section of the book. It's taking me forever and so much time. That's why my head is down. I haven't been on social media that much. I haven't been sharing that much because I've been working on this thing. But I'm talking about this a lot, control. Because when you talk about mental health problems, when you talk about anxiety, you have to talk about control. And so when people feel out of control, they try to control other people or try to control something, themselves or other people. So controlling other people is like, for example, discrimination, teen peer violence, and teen dating violence. Such a problem. This is such a problem among young people. And I have the statistics, and if I have some time, I may get to some of those. So, for example, visits to hospital emergency rooms for girls ages 10 to 24 due to emotional distress doubled from 2001 to 2019. Doubled. People are struggling and it is getting worse. So ACE means adverse childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences. So this has increased. So all of these things, suicidal behaviors is ideation to attempting, eating disorders, self-harm, and substance misuse, all could lead, and also discrimination, teen peer violence, and teen dating violence, all could lead to an increase of adverse childhood experiences. Because so depression leads to these, depression and anxiety leads to these, and then these lead to more adverse experiences that we have to deal with, which leads to more anxiety and depression, right? And they have long-lasting consequences on the individual and the community well-being. So this is a huge problem. So secondary, I have notes down here. Hold on. So secondary and tertiary impacts of anxiety and depression increase the intensity of anxiety and depression. So this is a cyclical and spiraling problem. So this is a huge concern. So when I looked at all the research, all of the studies that have been done on why this is a problem. So I looked at studies in the prevalence, and then I looked at studies of like, why? Why is this a problem? And what I do understand is there's 3 major correlations that has increased the mental health problems among young people. One is screen time, one is the COVID-19 pandemic, and one is discrimination. So let me talk about each of those, because let me talk about screen time first, because this is a biggie, and this is something that I've talked about for a really long time. I did my TEDx talk on it, but TEDx Wilmington talk on it. So researchers from Pew Research Center surveyed 743 American adolescents aged 13 to 17 in 2018. So 2018 found that 95% of them had access to a smartphone, and 45% of the participants, these adolescents, confessed to being online almost constantly, primarily using social media. So another study noticed that the mental health risk elevated proportional to time spent on screens. So the longer someone spent on screen, the worse that they felt. And they found that suicide-related outcomes increased from 29% after 1 hour of screen time to 33% after 2 hours of screen time, 48% after 5 hours of screen time, and 66% when screen time increased over 6 hours, over 5 hours, I'm sorry. So 66% when screen time increased over 5 hours. So the more time on screens, the higher the risk of suicidality is, or suicide-related outcomes. It's huge. I was presenting in my class this morning, and I started crying thinking about that statistic, because this was 2018. So think about the last 4 years since then, since that study happened. And if that study was published in 2018, it was probably information from before that. So in the last 5 years, with the pandemic, which we're going to talk about, and more social media outlets, it is sure to have increased since then. So that is a huge problem. Okay. So one theorist calls this the digital depression, 𝐏𝐚𝐫, and he describes it as negative feelings engendered by cyberbullying, sexual harassment, increased drug use, and all abetted by social media platforms. So let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're still talking about correlations. So Young Minds surveyed 2,400 young people ages 13 to 25 in early 2021. So this was a survey that was done with a ton of adolescents to really find out what is going on with them during this pandemic. 80% of the teens who had a mental health problem before the pandemic said that the pandemic made it worse. Furthermore, vulnerable populations such as gender diverse, neurodiverse, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in adolescents, like I said, with previous mental health problems, were among the most negatively affected by the pandemic. 75% of the adolescents on that survey reported thinking that the pandemic will have long-term effects on their mental health. So there was another study that looked at all of these studies going on all around the world with adolescents, and they concluded that the influx of mental health care utilization is expected because they see that this problem is pretty universal around the globe, that this was a problem, and that the allocation of resources to address child and adolescent mental health concerns is essential all over the world. Let's look at discrimination. So students with marginalized and intersectional social identities have disproportionately higher rates of compromised mental health and self-harming behaviors. This is due, as you could absolutely imagine, this is due to the social and emotional impacts. The social and emotional impacts of oppression, financial strain, and discrimination. So the CDC names racism as a public health concern, reporting that over 1/3 of all U.S. high school students felt that they've been treated badly or unfairly at school because of their race and ethnicity. They also say that students who experience racism are more likely to report mental health concerns and less likely to feel a sense of connectedness at school. In addition, research shows that females and gender nonconforming youth are particularly vulnerable to anxiety and depression and all the consequences of them. Okay. So we're looking at correlations, and in the studies, now I do link to it at the end of this video. I link to, and maybe if I post this video somewhere, you'll see the link below. I link to my entire proposal, my entire written proposal. It's 70 pages, and it has all of the citations in it. But when I did this literature review and I was reviewing those correlations, the things that had the relationship, they proved that there was a relationship between screen time and COVID-19 and discrimination with the increase of mental health problems. But there is no research that confirms the mechanisms that causes those correlations to be the problem. And so this part of the presentation is really sharing theory. So theories are just ideas, right? They haven't been proven necessarily. Some have been proven, but theory itself, the idea, the word theory just means an idea or a framework. And so these mechanisms that are probable that they've caused these correlations are what I'm presenting next, just to be clear. So Watson et al. Shares 2 reasons why screen use causes low self-esteem and depression. One is screen time interrupts a user's connectedness or sense of belonging in social situations. It also affects their mattering and how they perceive their own importance to other people. These are really important to all humans, and of course, incredibly important to this very sensitive time of adolescence when they want that sense of belonging and when they're trying to figure out themselves, if they matter. What's their position in the world? What are they doing here? What are they for? What's their worthiness? These are very important things during this very sensitive time. Okay. So this is more my theory that I've developed, and I talked about in my TEDx Wilmington talk and in my book, that the increase of the messages of our modern culture, mostly from our phone, but in the COVID pandemic, we're on the phone more, right? And so everything's influenced by these messages that we're getting constantly. And the messages that we're constantly getting leave us feeling powerless, worthless, and out of control. And there's 3 categories of that. One is that the messages that we're getting constantly encourage comparison, they motivate purchasing, and they trigger secondary trauma. So if you watch my TEDx talk, this is familiar to you, because these messages make success and they make worth and they make danger seem random, and they interrupt a youth's conceptual understanding of causality. So they interrupt, like when we are growing up, we have development of concepts. So as we grow, we develop more and more complex conceptual understanding of things. And one of those things that we understand the concept of is causality, like the idea that there's an event or an action or a state that is a direct result of another action or event or state, right? And that where one causes the other one. So cause and effect, causality, like something causes something else. And my argument is that the messages that we're constantly getting, especially around these three categories, interrupt our learning of causality. So, and that disconnects kids from their agency and their authority. And I'll define those in a second. But so in other words, these messages increase your powerlessness, your worthlessness, and your feelings of out of control, which cause anxiety. We think of those as symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of depression, but those things actually are causing depression. So let's talk about these three. So encouraging comparison, social media, like we already have all these cultural expectations of us that we have to be young and pretty and good enough and smart enough and everything has to be perfect. These are Western culture expectations, and they are ridiculous and too high. We don't know what they are, and so we have to do more to try to meet them, and we could never meet them because they're unrealistic, and so we always feel inadequate. That's why we're all walking around feeling like we're less than and inadequate. We're trying to hide that because we don't want anyone to know, because if they think we're inadequate, they won't let us belong. Remember, because mattering and connectedness is important to us. But social media, so we have these cultural expectations anyway in Western culture, but social media exaggerates this like a millionfold, like exponentially, encourages comparison culture. So we're comparing ourselves to somebody's filtered awesomeness, right? Our backstage mess, our mess in our head with whatever that little slice of a life that somebody posts online. And yeah, people are real and people are just like raw online a lot of times, but still sometimes it's people's highlight reel that you're comparing yourself to. And that is a huge problem. And that really contributes to the increase of feeling bad about yourself when you're looking at this. Yeah. Okay. So social media encourages comparison of body, popularity, skill, and beauty, and more, right? It's like in our face, the most important things to us. Our body, our way we look, our popularity, our skills and abilities, our coolness, our beauty, like in our face, all the things that are important to us. Second, motivating purchasing. So these messages of all of these marketing companies trying to sell to us or to our young people, they want you to think that you should just get something just because you're you. You deserve it, right? Because if they thought they emphasize causality, that you have to work to get something, you're not going to buy their stuff. They want you to not think that there's causality, that you should just get stuff just because you're cool and you deserve it. And this has profound effects on our mental health, because people don't get stuff just because they're cool. We don't get it. And then we're confused because the messages are constantly saying that we should. So companies, they exploit young people's insecurities to encourage the purchase. So they're exploiting insecurities, saying this will make you cool, or this will make you fit in, or this is what everyone has. And when young people are unable to make a purchase, their insecurities are left unresolved, and they feel helpless and they feel worthless. It's pretty sucky. And they don't know why they're worthless, because the message comes back, if you don't get this, you're worthless, because you should get this just because you should be worth it. And they don't know why they're not worth it, so they don't know how to fix it. And they just conclude again that they must not be worth it somehow. It's horrible. And it's all under subconscious. You're like, what is she talking about? I see this playing out all the time. If you ever saw a toddler going through a line in the grocery store and they can't get what they want and they're crying, like they are grieving that nobody loves them anymore. That's the feeling. Of course, we're not crying like that, but that's a feeling that we get when we can't get something, because it's confusing, because the messages all say that you should be worthy and get it. This is very powerful, and it's only really increased in the last 20 years as we're bombarded with advertising from everywhere. And now it's in our shows, it's in our games, it's everywhere. All right, and the last one is secondary trauma. So you might have heard me talk about this, like our sympathetic nervous system is supposed to trigger when we're in a situation where we have to do something. Now we're seeing things that are random and out of control from around the world. They might not even be random and out of control. There might be some background or some history that causes those things. Of course, there's a lot of things that are random, acts of violence, but we can't do anything. We're far away. So our helplessness makes us feel more out of control, and it feels like the world is more and more dangerous. It feels very, 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 very out of control. And so all of these things give us the message that there's no causality. Things are just random. They come and they affect how we feel and see ourselves. Okay, so, and they affect how we experience agency and authority. So we talked about mattering and connectedness. And now with what I was talking about with the messages that we're getting, it's interrupting agency and authority. So overall, from this research, I've concluded that the mechanism of why mental health problems have been increasing amongst young people is that our modern society and our increase in screen time and the COVID pandemic and discrimination and bullying disconnect people from mattering, from connectedness, from their agency, and from their authority. So connectedness is an intrinsic human need. People desire to be personally accepted, included, and respected by others. So in their study of 700 students aged 14 to 17, Lucas and Molina found that students' connectedness associated with lower levels of suicidal behavior, depression, and higher levels of self-esteem. So when people felt connected, they felt better. Another researchers, Monahan et al., add that students who feel school connectedness perform better academically and are less likely to participate in violence, substance misuse, and sexual promiscuity. The increase of connectedness is correlated with a decrease in mental health problems. So mattering. So the term mattering, Rosenberg et al. Introduced the concept of mattering to the body of mental health literature. And mattering is a multi-dimensional construct consisting of feeling valued by and adding value to oneself and others. So being valued for yourself, being valued, giving others value, and thinking about others people valuing you and giving them value. Did I say that right? So being valued by and adding value to oneself and others. That's mattering. Agency is a person's ability to affect the world around them by thoughts and actions in the response to the environment and circumstances. So things happen to you, but you can respond to those things. And your response is more important than what happens to you, because it makes or breaks how you go forward in life, like your mood, how you think about yourself, your relationships, all of it. So your agency makes a huge difference in how good your life is. You have agency. Everybody has it. Everybody has agency, but people have lost their connection to it. That's what I mean. So the mental health problems have been increasing because people lost their connectedness to their agency, connectedness to people, and connectedness with their own agency. They have skills and abilities because we've adapted for millions of years to have that ability to do stuff and problem solve and adapt. The dog is drinking water, and it's so loud. So sorry. Of course, every time I'm recording, he drinks water. So agency, we have that ability, but we're not connected to it, because not knowing causality is making us forget that we do. And also modern society, I was saying that modern society, with all of our tasks being easier, like we don't have to build our shelter or find our food. We don't have to protect ourselves. Well, we don't have to do stuff. Well, most of us, right, don't have to protect ourselves, or some of us don't have to protect ourselves. We don't have the daily thing that our ancestors had to do to survive. And so we don't see ourselves using the skills as much as our ancestors did, and we've lost touch with those skills. So on top of having all these tasks and having all these chores done for us by machines and picking stuff up at the store and having somebody else build your house and whatever, makes a difference to how we view ourselves. Like that, plus the phone and all the messages that things are random and you don't do anything to make any difference, has completely disconnected us from our agency. Authority is similar to agency, but I take this word from Paul Hansett wrote a book called Creating Wicked Students. And wicked is a name for a problem that is really hard to solve. So they call problems that are hard to solve, they don't have one answer, they call them wicked problems. And so he wrote a book on how to create wicked students, which means young people who have the competencies that they need to solve the wicked problems of our world. And a good example of wicked problems are racism, food shortages, poverty, those kind of big problems, like wicked problems. They're huge problems that don't have one answer. And there could be some smaller level ones like that are more complicated, but we really need to teach our young people how to solve wicked problems, because not only then do they solve those wicked problems, but also their sense of authority will help them have better mental health. So authority is, he says, comes from experience, and it must be learned by solving problems. So he calls this skills plus. So authority is skills plus, because wicked students go beyond what they did in the past. We have this ability, but we need to practice so we can see it again. He also adds that authority is more than just confidence and agency. Authority is a trust in oneself and a growth mindset. So this is what we've interrupted these things. They're here. We want them. They help us. We feel great when we have them still. And so the idea is we need this back online, right? Okay. So looking at some typical treatment options that have been around for a long time. And it's interesting because I found this one study. I'm gonna pull it up here. No, I'll say it when I get to it. Okay. So Most of the common evidence-based social work or psychological modalities for treating anxiety and depression in adolescents are cognitive behavioral therapy, that's CBT, or didactical behavioral therapy, or narrative therapy, or mindfulness, or somatic psychotherapies, or psychoeducation, and there's so much more. There's so many more. There's a lot of evidence-based treatment that addresses anxiety and depression in young people. And also it's facilitated in many different ways. For example, group work or individual therapy or self-administered, like a book or a podcast, or like an online course or something like that. So there is a lot of things that have evidence that they help people feel better from their anxiety and depression. Okay, so there's similarities in all these things. So these modalities that work to help people feel better about themselves and their lives have these similarities. They invite people to witness themselves. They invite people to develop self-compassion, self-trust. They emphasize active meaning-making. They improve self-communication. They strengthen relationships and community. They recognize their identity as multi-storied. They change negative thinking patterns, practice self-care, and connect people to their agency and authority. You see where I'm going with this, right? So I was saying that in my proposal, I had to look at group versus individual versus self-administered and what benefits people the most. And really all three of these ways of facilitating helps people have very powerful results in helping people. And because there's such a shortage of mental health providers right now, that's what I was interested in. Is group as good as individual therapy? And yes. Is self-administered as good as individual therapy? And a lot of times, yes. It depends on the situation, but when resources are small, because some of the studies, you have to understand that some of the studies are just about these self-administered programs, and the results are really good. There's been some studies of the same group program and individual program, 12 sessions, and they match in terms of how much benefit that they had on the young people. So, yeah, so this is good news because this is a huge problem, which I'm kind of, this whole literature review, I'm telling the story of why the world needs what I'm proposing, my program, Compass, which I'll tell you about too. Okay. So then I talked about barriers and facilitators. I don't want to get on the words here. Then I talked about barriers and facilitators to mental health treatment. So there is some barriers, and mainly they're health inequities, the stigma, and a shortage of providers, which we talked about a lot. So, yeah. So only 42.1% of adolescents seek or receive treatment. Only 42%. Black and Latinx adolescents are 14% less likely than white adolescents to receive treatment for their depression. Though early intervention is advised, the best outcomes happen when you intervene early. The average time between the onset of mental health symptoms and the engagement in treatment is 11 years. 11 years. That means half the people are more than 11 years. That means they're done with their adolescence by the time they get help. They suffer all of that time. Health inequities include cost being too high, lack of mental health literacy, lack of understanding, what the problem is, a mistrust of medical professionals, scarcity of contextually competent treatment. That means contextually competence means that that people really understand the context of people's lives. and take that into account when they're doing treatment. So they're not treating a medical illness. They're treating a person in their environment. It's very social work to think about a person in their environment. Like, what else is going on? Is there oppression going on, either systemically or personally? Is there abuse going on? Is there a lack of supports and resources? What is the context of a person's life? Because understanding that really helps, because you're not treating a person in a vacuum, right? People aren't struggling in a vacuum. They're struggling in their environment, in their family and their community environment, and in the bigger environment of our world. So it's important to be competent, but a lot of providers don't understand the differences, maybe of race and the complexities that other people experience from themselves if they're not the same race. So Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities have more intense stigma after disclosing a mental health problem. And culturally insensitive, like I said, providers assume different meanings from the same symptoms of people of color. Okay. So I think everyone really knows about stigma, so I don't have to say too much about that, but it's a really powerful determinant, really powerful barrier for people of getting help. And so I'm considering all these barriers when I'm creating what I want to create that will push past all those barriers and really help solve this problem, or really help contribute to solving this problem. So in general, I'm looking at facilitators as groups, because they're, in most cases, or in a lot of the research, are equal to individual therapy, or at least there's very high impact. So that provides more access to people in different communities, and also addresses the shortage of providers. Psychoeducational creates it's not pathological. And psychoeducation could be given to everybody. So some people are suffering, some people are not suffering, but it might prevent future suffering. It might help them understand past suffering and heal from that. So psychoeducation is a very powerful approach that could go to the general population. So if we're thinking about that, like, what could we do for everybody, whether they're suffering or not? And people suffer at all different levels. So when you're self-reporting, if you suffer from mental health things, probably a lot less is reported than is actually the suffering that's actually happening. Or if you get them on a good day. Some people have bad days, and on a good day, they forget all about their bad days. That's wonderful. So then thinking about high schools as facilitators, because kids spend so much time in their schools. So it's a really appropriate place to facilitate some kind of treatment to this huge problem. Okay. All of this indicates that there's an urgent need for a new social work intervention for young people. Especially that, I know I told you I'd come back to, there's been some studies, Wise et al. 2019 reviewed 453 studies of mental health modalities in the last 53 years. And they found that there was no effect size difference, meaning that in the past, for young people, ages 4 to 18, in the past, this is how much things were helped, and now it's the same. They haven't grown in their ability to do modalities to help people more than they did 53 years ago. It's crazy. So we really urgently need something new and something that's going to be really impactful. Enter Compass. Yay. Okay. So Compass stands for connected, open, motivated, powerful, and self-sustaining. Compass. I love the metaphor of the compass. It's the root of the word compassion, which I love. I think it's so powerful. When my podcast comes out, if you listen to my podcast, you really get a good earful of like the power, the healing power of compassion on all levels. But a compass is also a guide. It's a direction for us to go out of pain and suffering towards something better, towards connectedness, openness, motivation, power, and self-sustenance. So I would like to create a program called Compass as a wise intervention. So the theory that I'm basing, the framework that I'm basing this program is through a wise intervention. And a wise intervention is a category of therapeutic interventions that can be delivered by lay people. So teachers can teach, high school teachers can teach it. It doesn't have to be a clinician. There's an emphasis in simple psychological concepts. It's facilitated in non-clinical settings, so it could be facilitated in a high school, and it invokes positive human attributes instead of psychopathology. So my proposal is to create a psychoeducational curriculum for high school health teachers to teach in their mental health units. So to create 6 lesson plans for high school health teachers. And they would be performing these wise interventions, which the research shows, and I don't have that in my notes right now, but if you wanted to get my whole proposal, it shows the results from all over the world of examples of wise interventions. The other benefit of wise interventions is that they're short term and everybody could receive them. So they're not just for people who are suffering with anxiety and depression. They're from everybody, and everybody improves. So I love this modality. So there's 3 principles of wise interventions. And one is they alter meaning making to promote change. So they help people, like humans are meaning makers, and we make meaning. When we experience something, we have to process it and understand what it means, because we like that order. And so we want to know what it means. And so we put meaning on it as fast as we could to kind of feel like there's order, but we mistake a lot of the meaning. Our meaning is made from our history and what we've known before, or something like that. And so part of the wise intervention is teach people how to make meaning to promote change. And they notice that a change in meaning can be self-sustainable, which means that if you read something, like they're teaching people how to read the world and how to read their experiences. And when you read it differently, when you learn how to read it in a way that's not biased by negative self-view or something like that, when you read it a different way, that new meaning sustains itself and stays. So it stays for a really long time. That means that an intervention like this could really have a lasting impact on people. The third principle, as I really appreciate, is that people make meaning within complex systems. So there are systems of the world that we're not in a vacuum. This is not a medical model and we just have to like fix our own mind. No, we live in a system and we are interacting with the system. So if the system's a problem, we interact with the system and change the system. We're affected by the system and we affect the system. So it's like once you heal, you kind of gather up and try to, stop oppression everywhere. Okay. And help people and be kind and lift people up and yada, yada, yada. Okay. So back to these positive attributes. So remember these 4 terms, they're just threading through all of this, that now in these wise interventions, the positive attributes that we're talking about instead of the psychopathology, like, oh, you manifesting, blah, 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 your drive, whatever, you whatever, your subconscious is doing the wrong thing, whatever, all those like negative psychopathology stuff, or like you have anxiety, you just have to live with it. That's BS. we're teaching in this wise intervention, we're teaching mattering, connectedness, agency, and authority. So isn't that beautiful? It came together like that. Okay. So wise interventions are psychoeducational and experiential learning activities. So in the programming or in the intervention, in the training or in the class, like the curriculum for the class, because it's like the layperson is teaching, they teach about direct labeling. And direct labeling means like if you say you're an earth caring person, when people are labeled something positive, they start to, if they like it, they start to think about themselves and perform that way. So if you call someone earth conscious and they're like, oh, then they'll start to step into that identity more. So that I mean, obviously it works with negative things too, but you don't want, that's what's happening in society, and we're trying to do it with the positive things. Reflecting on positive aspects of the self. A lot of times in the coaching industry online, I really know this is such a pet peeve of mine because I'm a social worker and I've been a therapist for a really, really long time. And in the coaching industry, they're constantly looking at what are your blind spots? What's your problem so I can fix it? And in a way, I feel like there's a real pathologizing going on because they're trying to find your blind spots instead of finding your positive aspects of you. So when I meet with somebody, I right away am trying to find their positive aspects. And it's so powerfully transformative because people are constantly looking at all of their negatives all of the time in their heads, right? And thinking of their deficits and what they didn't do. And so to have a place where someone's actually noticing the good in you, that's the direct labeling. They start to step into that. I don't know why the coaching industry doesn't get that yet, but understanding and normalizing emotions, right? Just understanding, why do we feel bad? Because people think feeling bad means you've done something wrong a lot of the time. And so understanding why we feel bad and that you're human, that's a regular human reaction to what's going on, totally changes how people, like, they don't judge themselves anymore. If it's a regular human reaction to what's going on, So these activities increase empowerment and connectedness through action, prompting as alternative meaning. So helping people think about a same situation and what kind of meanings could you put around that situation. Once you realize that there's a lot of different meanings that you could put around something, then you realize, like, oh, because a lot of times we like conclude a meaning and it's negative and we're like, that's all there is. But once you start brainstorming with people and thinking about all the different ways you can make meaning around an experience, then for the next time that you could brainstorm a little bit and you don't have to just take the first thing that comes. Promoting a growth mindset and empathy. So empathy can be taught. So it's really important to start to teach empathy because that's definitely going to make the world a better place. I did a whole video on this, why empathy helps people feel better. And it does. First of all, it helps people treat other people better, but also it helps them feel better because they're connected instead of ostracizing relationships, they're connecting in relationships, right? If you feel out of control and you try to get power over somebody, you have no empathy, but you're trying to get power over them. It's terrible for the whole community, for the people and the whole community. But if you're training them to have some empathy, then they're connecting with people. And instead of feeling out of control or feeling in control, right? It's like win, 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 if you think about it. So empathy is going to be a big part of the program. Implementing, and you could teach empathy by one of the studies was talking about teaching empathy, and you tell stories of some people having hardship to try to bring out that emotion. And I think we do this all the time in TV. Like when we watch something on TV and someone's going through a hard time, we could feel that a little bit. And I think that's a powerful way. Sometimes there's so much negative you see and you kind of just don't care anymore. But when a show does it well, and like you could put yourself in the role, not all shows do that. But you could put yourself in the role and you could feel what the person's feeling. Then you actually grow. People do grow skills in empathy, and it does make them do less violence or treat people better. So people who have bullying behavior and go through training that increases their empathy do decrease their bullying behavior. So implementing goal setting, building confidence in one's abilities, noticing one's abilities. Then it's pretty easy to build confidence once you notice your abilities is like your agency, right? And your authority. So interpreting others' behavior, managing conflict, disappointment, and difficult people. We got to do that. There's difficult people all over the place. And so we need to know how to get away if we need to, or block them out if we need to, or, what to do when we're around them, instead of blaming ourselves or taking that into our heart, whatever they say. So bolstering social connectedness and mattering, of course. You know those buzzwords by now. Enhancing motivation for change and positive behaviors. So it's going to be awesome. Okay. So welcome to Compass. So Compass will be a curriculum. So it's a 6 learner-centered lesson plans. So there'll be psychoeducational short form videos. So there'll be a voiceover video with animation, short enough to show in the class that would kick off discussion. There'll be discussion prompts, small group activities, and reflective exercises that build wicked competencies. Remember, wicked is those problems that are hard to solve. As part of the curriculum, they'll be reading the 5 chapters of the book. In addition, the whole program, my capstone project, will also include a teacher training program for these health teachers. So there'll be 5 modules online, self-study, covering like the introduction to the program, mental health literacy, helping them understand the neurobiology of what's happening. Because I did interview a bunch of health teachers when I was setting this into motion, when I was deciding to create this project. They're still teaching stuff of like medical model. They're still teaching stuff of like 30 years ago, of the medical model of like, sometimes you have a regular worries and sometimes you have an anxiety disorder. This is not helpful to anybody. It's really not helpful. So to increase their mental health literacy, to help them understand what is really going on for young people, will be part of the training. And then I'll teach principles of inclusive instruction. So including everybody being proficient in contextual competency. So it used to be called cultural competency, but it's such a BS, because how can you be competent in so many other cultures? And to have the ego to think you're competent in that culture is crazy. You have to actually have cultural humility. So contextually competent is a recognition that there's a context. And so you're aware and you are interested in knowing more about that context. It's not like a person in a vacuum. So the principles of inclusive instruction is really important, to have that diversity, equity, and inclusion piece part of the program, because it's such an important part of having people feel good. Because colonization and racism really hurts everybody. And of course, the people who have been marginalized historically and currently, of course, the trauma is much worse. But also that the trauma or the participation in it is really awful on the people who have power and privilege in our society. And so it's important to address this. As if we're talking about mental health, this has to be addressed. So also talking about, in this teacher training, talking about the needs of adolescents and managing any hot button moments that might come up in the class, like how to handle it, what to do if somebody gets upset, what to do if there's arguments, what to do if someone's triggered. This will be covered in the teacher training. And these are the 6 lessons in the program. Let me make myself smaller. Oops, sorry. These are the 6. So I'm almost done here. Okay, there. Okay, so these are the 6 lessons in the Compass program. So lesson 1 is understanding it, and I have a typo here, I apologize. I saw that when I presented to my class and I never fixed it. That was just an hour ago. But understand it biologically or neurobiologically, culturally, socially, understanding where these problems come from, because problems come from a context as well. They don't come from inside you. And this is lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 would be learning the lies that it tells. So understand the negative thinking and how the negative thinking convinces us to, really gives power to the problem and takes power away from us. Lesson 3 would be cultivating your control. So these go along with these 5 steps that my 5 steps to curing anxiety. Understand it biologically, learn the lies that it tells, cultivate your control, make peace with yourself, and then learn happiness-sustaining habits. So these are going to be the 5 lessons, and the last one is reflecting on the whole unit, where the students present their final project. So lesson 3 is like thinking about your agency and authority, and making meaning and understanding your place and your abilities. Lesson 4 is making peace with yourself, because people can't cure their anxiety and still not like themselves. You have to like yourself, because if you don't like yourself, then you think that you can't handle anything. And then you feel so disempowered by that anxiety just has a lot of power over you. So you really have to have this compassion. This piece is in lesson 4. It's all along, but it's definitely in lesson 4. Instead of judging, we're stripping the judging away that we do, and then replacing that with compassion all along. And then lesson 5 is brain, body, and spirit sustaining habits. So those self-care things, those things that you really need to do every day, because happiness is not like some people are happy and then some people aren't happy. Happiness is generated. You have to generate that happiness every day. And so you need to put forth these habits that sustain that happiness. It's very, very important. And then lesson 6, like I said, will be reflecting on the whole thing and giving back. So that is my project. What do you think? So what do you think about Compass and what it can do? What did you think about the stats and what you heard? Anything surprise you? I'm sure a lot of it did not surprise you. I'm sure you're just as concerned as I am, and so many people I talk to. I mean, educators, social workers, parents, and kids, we're all really worried. I believe in these young people. I believe they're highly adaptive. They're highly skilled. We just have to remind them that they are, and keep telling them until they believe it again. So, so thank you for listening and getting through this whole video about this project, a boring doctorate project, a very academic. But I hope I presented it in a way that, that was interesting. So, I'd love any comments that you have or anything that you have interest. If you're a health teacher, hit me up. I'm looking for some people to pilot the program. And, yeah, so thank you so much for listening. Stick around, because I have this podcast coming up January 21st. So you might watch this and it might be after January 21st, 2023. If you're watching this before that date, that's the date that my podcast released, called Anxiety, I'm So Done With You. So it's a teen's guide to ditching toxic stress and hardwiring your brain for happiness. So that's coming out. And so if you're watching this after January 21st, then go head over to anywhere you love to listen to podcasts, and it'll be there. On YouTube, I'm Dr. Jodi, and on TikTok, I'm at Dr. Jodi as well. So come find me, hang out with me. Let's learn together. Let's do something. Let's change the tide of this horrible problem with our young people, and show them that they could get better and they deserve to get better.